Well, Mr. Speaker, with rents slated to increase again this May and June for many in my community, the rising food costs, and of course the power rates about to go up once again, the poverty tax credits, the affordable tax credits just don't add up every 3 months when you have to pay your rent every month. So I want to ask the minister, does she believe that income assistance recipients deserve to pay 60% of their income towards their shelter allowance?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, if you look at this budget, the 2011-2012 budget, we have seen in this province a major investment that has not been seen in decades, and that's what I talked about with the multiple plan. For example, you can take an individual now, and if they would be able to take what we have presented, it will equal in 1 year increase for an individual in this province of $700 more in their pocket in a year. You can also take a single mom with 2 children, and now what she will be receiving because of this government is over $2,300. I think that's quite an investment. We know that we're working hard to make a difference and we're going forward, but there's not one person on that other side of this house that can stand here today and talk about any type of those kind of multiple investments. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the last round of federal funding of the $128 million saw some great benefits to the existing housing stock, while also creating many new units across the province. But, Mr. Speaker, those funds will soon be depleted, and with the Employment Support Income Assistance Act still under review, rents continue to rise. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, will she commit to ensuring that the shelter component is seriously taken into consideration during the ESIA review in light of market value rental units consistently increasing each year?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. What the member has to understand is that history has shown that when you increase the shelter rates, what happens is there's a negative effect because landlords increase the rates. So we're not going to go there. We understand that it's a multiple plan. The last increase in shelter rates in 2005 was only $50, and in 2006, $20. There was no increase since then, but you put that together with the lack of investment in any other area from the previous government, you resulted in the poor situation that we found ourselves in when we came into government. We changed that. We have a multiple plan approach, and we have invested last year $70 million in our tax programs, along with just last week another $22 million that will be rolled out over the next 3 years. No one else on the other side can even get near those figures. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are seeing that life isn't getting better for many low-income Nova Scotians. CBC is reporting that 800 families in Truro are using a food bank each month, up from 500 only 1 year ago. We also know that over half of the users of food banks in Nova Scotia are on income assistance, which tells us that ends just aren't meeting for many people. Although the government has increased income assistance rates by $26 a month for some families, this amount is quickly swallowed up by the HST, electricity, and service fee increases. In fact, many of the clients in Truro stated that they simply can't afford the cost of, quote, groceries, gas, and electricity, end quote. Their basic needs, Mr. Speaker. My question, if the Minister of Community Services is confident her government is making life better for Nova Scotians, how will she explain the 60% increase in usage at the Truro Food Bank?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, we do understand that the price of food has risen and it is affecting everyone in the province of Nova Scotia, and that's why we have focused on the multiple action plan that I just spoke about and those increased dollars that are rolling out to help families throughout this province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on November 17th of last year, when asked about the increasing reliance on food banks in Nova Scotia, the Minister of Community Services stated that, quote, there are many difficult times and that food banks are doing a fabulous job to help us in the province of Nova Scotia. There's no question many volunteers are ensuring food banks are doing very good work, but there's a problem when more and more Nova Scotians are being forced to rely on them, Mr. Speaker. So my question, will the Minister of Community Services explain why she doesn't have a specific plan to support food banks, even though she's acknowledged their importance in this House?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. The important fact is that we have a plan that we have been rolling out, and people have seen that action in terms of the increased number of dollars in many different areas. We've also increased the ability for individuals who are on IA to work and to keep more money. Those people with disabilities, that has actually doubled in their monthly income ability to work and bring in more income. We really respect what the food banks do, and it's our hope with our multiple strategy that we can go forward and that someday we will have a society that we will not need to have food banks. But it will be this government that will make those strides forward, because the other governments were spinning their tires for many, many years. Thank you.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The coordinator of the Colchester Food Bank told CBC, quote, there are not that many jobs out. There are layoffs and a lot more layoffs coming, end quote. Gasoline prices are up almost 19% since last year. Food costs have increased by 3.3%. Yet we see no clear signs that the government's actions are addressing the root causes of increased food bank usage. So my question to the minister, if the plan is working, will the Minister of Community Services commit to ensuring food bank usage goes down in this province by next year?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to wonder where we would be today if it wasn't for this government in terms of the food banks, because we do need their support, and we're working together, and we appreciate what they do. But as I said, we have made multiple differences in terms of where we have invested our money. As in fact, recently, just last week, we increased the child tax benefit by 22%. However, when the member who just questioned me, when his party was a government, they clawed back the tax benefit for children. So I think they should look into the mirror.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister has the floor. Order. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, rural outmigration is having a devastating impact in communities throughout Nova Scotia. Many of our students leave to go to university or community college and do not return. One of the important tools in providing students with summer employment, as well as allowing them to work with local nonprofit organizations, has been the Student Career Skills Development Program. This program partners with not-for-profit organizations to create career-related summer jobs for post-secondary students. The jobs will be distributed across the province based on population and unemployment for each county. That's what's stated on the government website. Speaker, this year Richmond County is being allocated 9 student positions, down from the 15 positions in 2009. My question is, will the Minister for Rural Economic Development explain what change in population or unemployment took place in Richmond County to warrant such a reduction?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, through you, I will, with respect to that summer employment program, it's been based on, we base it on unemployment. So when a member asks a question about a particular area or region, it's done on a comparative basis. So we will look at all the regions as a whole and the unemployment in those particular regions, and they would get a rating based on. What we've done this year with that particular program, Mr. Speaker, is that we have increased the amount of funding in that program. However, having said that, the demand for that program has increased enormously. And if the member would like, I'd be more than willing to have a look at Richmond County on an individual basis.
The honourable member for Richmond, on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's actually been some interesting developments this year in where positions have been granted under the Student Career Skills Development Program. For example, in Queens, it went from 1 position in 2009 to 9 positions this year. Shelburne went from 8 positions in 2009 to 17 positions this year. Lunenburg went from 12 positions in 2009 to 30 this year. And Antigonish doubled from 6 in 2009 to 12 this year. And Mr. Speaker, in case you didn't notice, these are all NDP government-held ridings. Mr. Speaker, my question is, will the Minister for Rural Economic Development explain what population or unemployment changes took place in Queens, Shelburne, Lunenburg, and Antigonish to justify the significant increase in student positions under the Student Career Skills Development Program?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, through you to the member opposite, I've already said that the criteria for summer employment is based on employment rates in particular regions. There's no politics involved here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that may have been the way of past governments. I can't speak to that, but certainly for this government, politics does not play a role.
The honourable member for Richmond, on your final supplementary.
Yes, I find that funny too, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, I asked the Minister to provide us with the stats that he's relied upon, and I would hope that he will provide the House with that to show the sudden increase in unemployment rates in Queens, Shelburne, Lunenburg, and Antigonish that this program is based on. I'm sure that's something we would all want to know. Mr. Speaker, having it cut in Richmond County from 15 to 9 is truly a double whammy, because not only does it make it more difficult for university students to find employment, it makes it that much more of a challenge for the not-for-profit organizations that rely so heavily on these students, especially during the summer months. Mr. Speaker, 2 organizations, for example, that have been told no by this minister is Telil, a community cable station which is so important to the social, cultural, and economic development of our county, as well as St. Peter's Lions Marina, which runs the community station in St. Peter's, as well as the marina at the entrance to the Bredor Lakes. So my final supplementary to the minister is he prepared to review again the statistics on population and unemployment in Richmond County to hopefully increase the amount of student positions being awarded to our county this summer?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through you, for the information of all members of the House, this year we created 535 summer job placements. That's an increase. I think last year, I think it was 400 and something. Mr. Speaker, I will say this, and this is for information for all members of the House. If they know of anyone that's applied for summer employment and it's been denied, there is an appeal process, and I would advise everybody to utilize that process.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week CBC News reported that about 800 people in Truro were using the food bank. That's up 500 people from a year ago. It was reported in November of 2010 the number of people using the food banks in Nova Scotia was up 33% since 2008. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Premier. Will the government abandon its plan to grow the government bureaucracy by over 600 FTEs and instead develop a meaningful way to help Nova Scotians feed and care for themselves?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, the reality is that there is the number of provincial employees are going down, Mr. Speaker. That's being done through attrition. It's being done in a reasonable way. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, I'm sure, like everyone, I was distressed to see the comments that were attributed to the Prime Minister when he said that poverty is the responsibility of the provinces and not the jurisdiction of the federal government, Mr. Speaker. I was very disturbed by that.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, food banks are struggling to meet the demand as more people continue to flood their doors. It's not just people who are unable to find work that are forced to use the feed bank, but it's also hardworking Nova Scotians who work every day and are making the difficult choices between having shelter with heat and electricity or having food on their tables. The rising cost of goods and services, coupled with the highest taxes in the country, is crippling Nova Scotians who are working harder and taking home less. Fees are increased. Electricity is going up. Mr. Speaker, my question to you, to the Premier, is this. Will this government balance the budget now so it can provide meaningful tax relief to Nova Scotians sooner?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know, it's astounding, really. The reality is that this is a government who is focused on making sure that the people, especially the most vulnerable people in our society, are protected. We brought in the affordability tax credit. We brought in the disability tax credit. Mr. Speaker, we took the HST off of home energy. We took it off of children's clothing, shoes, Mr. Speaker. All of these were designed to try and help those people who have the most difficulty trying to make ends meet, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that is sensitive to the fact that every time there is an increase in the consumer prices, it affects those at the lowest end of the income scale most profoundly, Mr. Speaker. That is why we are taking the actions that we are taking.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Premier needs to tour down reality lane. It is his government that increased the taxes by 2% in this province. It is his government that raised user fees by over 1,400 user fees. All of these are being paid by the taxpayer in Nova Scotia, and he has nothing to be proud of. Mr. Speaker, with rising fuel costs affecting the cost of food and Nova Scotians' ability to get to grocery stores that are long distances,
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
It's very interesting how much the Minister of Finance has to say when it comes to somebody over here telling him the same kind of things that he used to flap his lips about. Mr. Speaker,
Question.
And I believe that is parliamentary. Mr. Speaker, with rising fuel costs affecting the cost of food and Nova Scotians' ability to get to grocery stores that are long distances away, my question through you is to the Minister of Agriculture. What is this government doing to help people buy local produce that's grown closer to their own homes?
Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite, I guess, if anyone should be aware of Select Nova Scotia, which was a program shaped by the NDP in opposition, brought in by the Conservatives when they were in government, Mr. Speaker. And this.
Order, please. Order. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a recent polling of Nova Scotians on their awareness of Select Nova Scotia 33% of respondents said they were well aware and are engaged in buying local. There is no government doing more to engage Nova Scotians and promote buying local in their area, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently the Premier received a letter from the David Suzuki Foundation along with other concerned groups urging this government to take action to protect Nova Scotia's precious waterways. The Foundation says that because government has not performed due diligence in dealing with the causes of serious nutrient pollution along the Wentworth, Carleton, Metagan and Sissebu River systems, that the government is putting our environment in jeopardy and acting contrary to the province's own water strategy. My question is for the Minister of Environment. Is he aware of this letter, and what actions has he taken as Minister to address these concerns?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite. And through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell the member that I'm very aware of this particular issue, and I just want to give a brief history lesson to the honourable member, is that this government, Mr. Speaker, has been in power for 22 months, and this is a very complex issue. We're taking this very seriously, and we appreciate the importance of this water, whether it's fresh water or salt water. We're going to do the right things for the people of Nova Scotia. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, according to John Waring of the David Suzuki Foundation, nutrient levels like those found in these water systems are, and I quote, unheard of under normal circumstances. He continues, when we see those kinds of levels, we take proactive measures to protect the environment and public health by building treatment facilities. He concludes, why that is not being done here is beyond comprehension. So my question to the minister is, why isn't this government treating these polluted water systems and working to reverse the damage that has been done to them by nutrient pollution?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, through you, we have met a number of times with the stakeholders, with the communities, and we are moving forward. The report that you're talking about, we support that as a most probable cause of the nutrient loading to that particular river system. And I can assure you, again, in 22 months, this particular government has done more than the previous governments have done in decades. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is a crisis that needs immediate attention. There have been 3 major studies conducted by the Nova Scotia Environment on this issue. The province has a water quality strategy, and yet we still see no tangible action from the NDP. We still wait. Mr. Speaker, our waterways are our most precious and invaluable resource. Our very existence is contingent on access to clean water. However, as the 2008 federal report on water quality indicates, we may be faced with increasing scarcity and diminishing quality of our fresh water. And this is an increasing concern for many of my constituents who use and live along our waterways. So my question to the minister is, will this government act immediately to treat the Wentworth, Carleton, Metagan and Sissebu River systems and protect them from future contamination?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Again, through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear of the time frame that we've been in office. 22 months. We've dealt more with this issue, very complex issue. We have introduced new regulations to deal with this particular sector, and we're moving forward with them regulations. And I want to point out that this particular minister takes this very seriously, whether it's fresh water or salt water. We have put protection in to protect Georges Bank, and we'll do the same thing for the Carleton watershed. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to all the people in the House for that wonderful. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Mr. Speaker, the swordfish industry in Nova Scotia is worth more than $12 million each year and is an important economic driver for some coastal communities. Recently, Mr. Speaker, we've learned that some organizations are opposed to the industry obtaining a certification saying that it is an eco-friendly business. So my question to the minister, what is government doing to make sure the sword fishing industry of this province receives this certification?
The Minister of Fisheries.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to the member opposite, I want to tell you we're doing a lot. And we know that the certification is very important to this particular sector. And anybody who wants to be familiar with this particular industry, I suggest that you go out and get the movie tonight, The Perfect Storm, because this is the industry that is represented in that movie. And we have dealt with a number of sectors through Nova Scotia, and we'll continue to work with them. And I thank the member opposite for the question.
The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I'm quite acquainted with The Perfect Storm. Yeah, I've been in the odd one myself. Mr. Speaker, a draft report. Mr. Speaker, a draft report recently released states that the industry is sustainable. The Nova Scotia Sword Fishermen's Association is applying with the Marine Stewardship Council. It is important for the industry to obtain this certification if it's to remain competitive, Mr. Speaker. So my question, what consultations have you had with the association, and will your government help them in their applications?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the member opposite, I want to table a document that actually outlines the amount of money, and if I can see it here, it's $57,420 that we helped out the long line and the harpoon fleet in this particular sector. There's a number of different particular industries that are identified here. Mr. Speaker, I understand the length of time, and I'm going to table this, and hopefully the member can review this. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the long line fishery has been a tradition and one that's created jobs and economic development for the fishers of this province for many years. Like most of the fisheries, though, it's in danger, and this certification will help ensure that the sword fishery is not lost. So my question to the minister, will the minister commit to supporting this application in writing and help the association obtain this certification?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I tabled a document that we have financially supported this particular sector and a number of other sectors across Nova Scotia. I just want to point out how important this particular certification is, because we are in a global market, and if we do not have this particular certification, there is a possibility that they'll see some stormy conditions. And I can assure you that it's going to be smooth sailing for our fishing sector. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Strait campus at Nova Scotia Community College has achieved great success with its new licensed practical nurse program. It has taken a 2-year program and merged it into an 18-month course. Graduates of this program have helped fill a need in our healthcare system, especially due to a high number of recent retirements. Unfortunately, the future of the licensed practical nursing program at the Strait campus is in doubt. And my question is, will the Minister of Health advise whether her department and her government will continue funding for this program at the Strait campus?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, the previous government had a continuing care strategy to open new nursing home beds and replace a number of beds, and that strategy required an increase in the number of LPNs available to work in that sector. And as a result, the Department of Health invested additional money to fast-track LPN training around the province, and the Strait campus of Nova Scotia Community College was one of those areas that had this program. And I believe the second cohort from that program will be graduating in January of the upcoming year, Mr. Speaker, and we will assess what our need is for additional LPNs as we see what happens in the sector, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Speaker, the licensed practical nursing program at the Nova Scotia Community College Strait campus has already graduated 30 students, as the minister has indicated, with the next 30 due to graduate in January of 2012. Currently, a number of students who are enrolled in the Academic and Career Connections program with the hope of entering the LPN program in January 2012. So those students are hoping the minister will be able to give an indication very soon so that they can make some career choices as they move forward. Mr. Speaker, the results show that most of the graduates, the first graduates from this program, have found employment in the Strait area, allowing them to stay home and work home. If this program is not offered at the Strait campus, they will be forced to leave to study in another area, reducing the likelihood that they will return home to work. So my question again is, will the Minister of Health advise what steps her government is taking to ensure that the LPN program remains for another year at the Strait campus?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is the case that we want to make sure that we have the right mix and the right numbers of health professionals in the right places to deliver care throughout Nova Scotia. We've had a very good nursing strategy. The LPN portion of that strategy will be reviewed, and as we go forward with the next round of continuing care planning for our healthcare sector, and we will work very closely with the community college system and my colleague, the Minister of Advanced Education, as we plan for the future of this program, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly want to commend Principal Tom Gunn at the Strait campus and the entire staff there for the work they've been able to do and how quickly they were able to how under very short notice they were able to put this program together, and certainly the quality graduates that are coming out of it. The challenge, and I appreciate the minister saying they want to review this, but we all know that sometimes government reviewing things can take a significant amount of time. The challenge is that you have students who have chosen to go back to school and have entered the Academic and Career Connections program to upgrade their marks in specific programs, and they are now going to be graduating shortly and having to make decisions as to where they are going to go in their career. Many of them want to go in the LPN program, but right now they're left in doubt as to whether it will be available in January 2012. So my final question, Minister of Health, is she prepared today to commit to a specific date as to when she will advise the community college and at the Strait campus as to whether the LPN program will be renewed for January 2012?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too want to commend the principal and the staff at the community college in the Strait. It's a beautiful facility. They do a very excellent job in terms of the education that they provide to the students who go through this and other programs, and we very much look forward to continuing to work with them, and we will be assessing what the needs will be in the long-term care sector with a view specifically to looking at the opening of new beds that are going to be happening in Port Hawkesbury, in Inverness, and in other parts of the community as we plan for our health human resources in the future. The community college system will be a vital part of training health care staff, Mr. Speaker.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I was going to ask a question about C. difficile in Cape Breton hospitals. Maybe what I'll do is I'll save that up for tomorrow and get the minister to answer the question at that time. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has elapsed. I will now recognize the host leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 10?
Bill number 10, the Electricity Act. I will now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today to speak to Bill number 10, the Electricity Act amended, and for just very briefly, it's more commonly referred to as the issue of renewable to retail sales, and the bill, in essence, would allow renewable energy suppliers to sell directly to consumers, would allow renewable energy suppliers to sell directly to consumers in the province, which would be a partial opening of the market. And I'd like to, this is obviously a very timely issue at the moment as we watch power bills increasing. We've seen, not even including the current rate increase application, power bills have increased 36% since 2002, over 7 rate increases. That is in addition to the efficiency tax that was added by this government during that time, and actually takes into account the HST decrease. It's still gone up 36% even with that HST change. You know, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker now, this issue goes back, in fact, to at least 2003, when the government had a report commissioned through the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee. And that committee in their recommendations stated, quote, that any seller offering electricity from renewable resources should be able to sell directly to electricity consumers, unquote. Mr. Speaker, it's 8 years later, almost 9 years later since that initial application, and numerous ministers, and nothing has been done. So this is the time to look at this. The government has spoken frequently about the need to move our energy mix from coal, what is effectively a dirty coal technology, imported coal, to more stable prices that can come from renewable energy. But what we've seen is that there are a number of issues related for renewable energy suppliers. One of them is the access to the grid. A second one is access to capital. And what happens, and many renewable energy suppliers have indicated that, and this is why this recommendation came out well before its time, that allowing a renewable energy supplier to sell directly to consumers provides the opportunity for a renewable energy supplier to raise capital on the markets because they know that they will have a revenue supply to pay for these things. It also allows these suppliers to compete directly with Nova Scotia Power for the provision of energy on the grid. Now, Madam Speaker, this is a significant change in the way that energy is done, and the reason why the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee recommended this to government a number of years ago was because they could see that fossil fuel energy prices were going to increase dramatically over the years, and that's exactly what they've done, and I'm sure that everybody in this House would agree that that trend on the fossil fuel side will continue. So the question that you have to look at is, how do you get as many renewable energy suppliers into the marketplace at the best possible price and at the most efficient price? So the things that you need to do, or you need to look at, where is the most efficient place to locate those renewable energy suppliers? How are you best able to ensure financing for those renewable energy suppliers? And what are the options available to ensure that that price is competitive as possible and that you don't encourage non-efficient renewable energy? This is why the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee, as well as a number of other researchers over the years, have recommended this to government and have recommended it repeatedly to government, that this opens the door and allows these suppliers to sell directly to a consumer. So let me give you an example. We're aware that Atlantic Superstores, for example, have put up a number of wind turbines around the province on their properties. They're able to provide that energy only to their own stores. They're not allowed to transfer any excess energy beyond the property boundary that they have. If you take our industrial parks, if a group of businesses wanted to get together and put a small wind development or solar development or geothermal development or any other renewable energy source on a parcel of land in an industrial park and sell that among themselves, they would be prohibited by law currently from doing that, because the energy cannot be transferred beyond the property boundaries unless they are under a power purchase agreement or under the coming feed-in tariff program. Neither the power purchase agreement nor the feed-in tariff program addresses the issue which the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee were concerned about. And that was ensuring that customers always know and that Nova Scotians always know that renewable energy is supplied at the most competitive price. Now, you will have seen comments recently from Nova Scotia Power at the Utility and Review Board hearing suggesting that they have proven that they can provide this energy more cheaply than anybody else. They've suggested that the URB hearings prove that, when in fact it doesn't, because what's happened if we take a look at the Digby Wind Farm as an example, what happened in the Digby Wind Farm was it became very difficult for Sky Power and subsequently Shabukta Windfields to gain financing. Scotian Windfields was one of the companies that actually came to the Resources Committee not that long ago and reminded the committee members, and we could look up the Hansard to see this, that one of the things that could have ensured that they could have delivered that project was in fact the ability for renewable suppliers to sell directly to consumers, because it would have allowed them to raise the financing necessary. The structure under the power purchase agreement did not allow them to raise the financing. So had this been in place, Nova Scotia Power would not necessarily have been the cheapest supplier of renewable energy, and Nova Scotia Power would have been forced to compete for the delivery of renewables. Now, one might argue, why not open this to all energy supplies? Well, I would hope that all members of the House would agree that any benefits or additional leg up that we might want to give to the energy industry should only be given to renewable energy suppliers. Not that anybody would likely build a coal plant today, but you don't want somebody saying, oh, I can sell directly to consumers, I'm going to go build a coal plant. You only want to do this on the renewable side. There are, and there will always be projects that Nova Scotia Power is better able to produce. There will or deliver. There will always be projects that might be best delivered through a feed-in tariff program, whether through some version of the government's one or some other one. But on the large-scale projects, we look at Nutby Wind Farm, or we look at even if we were to look at the New Page Biomass Project, or if we were to look at the Digby Wind Farm, or any of these larger projects, they can be competitively delivered to Nova Scotians for potentially lower rates at a competitive basis if this passes. And that's why, well before its time, as I say, in 2003, before we were even dealing with the major spikes we are seeing today, the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee recommended this to government as something that it must move forward on. And here we are almost 9 years later, and no government has yet to move forward on it. And that's a concern. And we've now heard that from the growing number of renewable energy suppliers, producers, and industry in this province, one after another. They have been coming forward and saying this is one of the tools that they need in their toolbox. This is one of the tools that they need to deliver that. When we look at what the options are to deliver more competitive rates, more stable rates, we need to look at a whole basket of goods. And that basket of goods will obviously include the stabilization that can come from renewable energy supply. It has to look at things like auditing Nova Scotia Power's for value for performance. It has to look at things like examining the rate of return for Nova Scotia Power, as we hear that they're looking for an increase in that rate of return. But another tool in that basket of goods has to be the ability to deliver renewable to retail sales. That is critical in this whole piece. Now, we would have been breaking ground in 2003 if it had been done then. We are not at this point. New Brunswick has already done this and has moved forward in this vein. And the building that our caucus office is in, and ironically the building the Department of Energy is in, the Bank Montreal Tower, is powered by Bullfrog Power. They have to buy their energy from New Brunswick to offset, because renewable to retail legislation does not exist in Nova Scotia. So there is a corporate customer, a landlord, who is trying to do good by replacing their energy with renewable energy, and yet they have to go to New Brunswick to buy it because the legislation in Nova Scotia currently does not permit them to do that. This type of legislation would permit that, and the many businesses around Nova Scotia that are moving to organizations such as Bullfrog Power, and who probably think they're buying power in Nova Scotia, would then have that ability to see that investment here in Nova Scotia and see that money spent here in Nova Scotia on Nova Scotia opportunities, on Nova Scotia jobs, and this would be an important tool in spurring the green economy in this province. So, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the time of the House, and I do hope that at some point we see this issue move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure today to rise in the House to speak on Bill number 10, an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy producers. And I want to thank the honourable member from Dartmouth East for bringing this forward and giving us an opportunity here to debate this particular bill in the House on the opening up of the electricity market. Now, if I understand the member correctly, the amendment would open the electricity market to competition and allow power producers to sell renewable electricity directly to customers and let the market determine the price that would be charged. And Madam Speaker, I can say there's nothing wrong with an open market, certainly providing that the conditions exist to support it. And those conditions would be lots of buyers, lots of sellers, and a method to bring them together. And in this case, good transmission systems across a wide area and non-variable sources of electricity to balance the intermittent nature of renewable sources of energy would be required. But in Nova Scotia, we do not have those conditions. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia is one of the smallest electricity markets in North America, and our transmission system, I believe, just could not support that kind of open market that the honourable member is proposing. So, Madam Speaker, we just don't have the population base here that's required. We also do not have a multiple source of renewable electricity over large expanses to ensure the reliability of the system and a limited amount of low-cost, clean, balancing energy supplies in the province. Madam Speaker, intermittent renewables still have limits. And when the wind is blowing in one area of the province, it's probably blowing right across the province. And the opposite of that is true as well. When it's not blowing, it's calm, most likely across the Nova Scotia. The third condition that must exist is good transmission connections, as I had just mentioned. And I use the analogy of a highway system. If you started out in Cape Breton on a 4-lane highway and moved along perhaps into Pictou County and narrowed down to 2 lanes and then went along further into the valley and perhaps only 1 lane, then that system is not going to be able to bear the load. So it works fine for the current system we have in the province, coming back to electricity, but it's, I don't think it'll work for an open market concept. Now, under certain conditions, it can work. In the New York, Pennsylvania area, which is one of the busiest transmission corridors in the world, the open market system works just fine for them. But Madam Speaker, here in Nova Scotia, we've already tested an open market system, and perhaps the honourable members are not aware of that, but since 2007, we've opened up the wholesale electricity market in Nova Scotia to competition, and to date, no eligible renewable electricity has been supplied at a price comparable to Nova Scotia power rates. And of course, I'm talking about the 6 municipalities that produce their own power here in Nova Scotia. Now, I'm not here to criticize the member's idea, and I'm not saying that it doesn't have some merit, and I guess you can say never. But Madam Speaker, looking at the big picture and under the current conditions that exist in Nova Scotia, I just don't think an open market is the answer here for ratepayers in the province. You cannot build a house without first building a foundation. And that's what this government is doing when it comes to electricity. We are taking actions and we're making decisions that support the conditions for an open market so that one day down the road, and if a government of the day so desires, the conditions will exist then to support it. So, Madam Speaker, what we are doing here in Nova Scotia, we're working to ensure that our electricity rates remain stable that we're lowering our greenhouse gas emissions and we're lowering our mercury emissions. And in actual fact, Madam Speaker, we are undertaking an energy transformation in Nova Scotia that is leading the world in its ambition. We want to stop our reliance on imported coal, the uncertain cost of that, and that generates our electricity at this time. And I believe we have many good alternatives to expensive coal. We have a wealth of natural resources from our own water, from our air, from our land. And just a few short years ago, Madam Speaker, we relied almost entirely on coal for our electricity production. It was well over 75%, and today that's been reduced down to 65% and dropping as we're using cleaner burning natural gas and a number of renewables. By 2020, 40% of our electricity will come from sources like wind and hydro, tidal, and biomass. Another 20% could come from natural gas, especially if prices remain competitive. So that makes our energy situation more secure, it helps keep our electricity costs in check, and it builds our local economies. Now, last year, our wind power capacity in the province more than doubled. We now have 160 wind turbines able to deliver power to the grid, and that number has been increasing month by month. At the same time, we are investing in reducing the amount of energy that we use. Our efforts are particularly focused on large users of electricity and also on low-income Nova Scotians that are least able to afford to pay for electricity. Between 2007 and 2011, demand has decreased by approximately 4% across the province. The third leg of the province's energy strategy is natural gas. It's cleaner, it's cheaper, it provides a firm backup to renewables, and it is local. Making sure that we maximize the potential of our onshore and our offshore oil and gas industries is a very important priority of this government. We believe that the best road to energy security is a portfolio approach, combining wind and hydro and tidal and biomass, solar, and natural gas. Just this morning, as was mentioned in question period, I had the opportunity to speak to the to OTANS, the Onshore-Offshore Technical Association of Nova Scotia, and about the play fairway analysis. And that's a study that we plan to start sharing with the oil and gas industry and around the world to attract new investment here in our province. And some of you may be aware, Madam Speaker, that we spent $15 million out of the Crown Share settlement with Ottawa to develop a new industry-standard geological picture of our offshore with the goal of reinvigorating our exploration efforts. And that work was commissioned by the OETR, the Offshore Energy Technical Research Association, on behalf of our government. And the analysis phase of that project is finished, and the results are very positive. The bottom line is that the study indicates there could be 120 trillion cubic feet of natural gas lying off our shores, and as many as 8 billion barrels of oil. And oil is certainly a new play in our offshore. But we're not taking that for granted. We're going to continue to do some technical assessment and to quantify these findings. Those are very large numbers and certainly could provide a lot of jobs for Nova Scotians and a lot of royalties to the province. And but we believe our potential there now is at least 3 times what was estimated previously, and perhaps even higher. So clearly oil and natural gas has a role to play, but we still have a lot of work in marketing what we've found and to generate new activity within the industry. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be only too glad to be able to look out my window at the Office of Energy and see a rig or two in the harbour and getting ready to be towed out to the offshore and spud a new well and create new economic development here in the province. So I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that we have a balanced approach then to our energy needs here in the province. Our government is working towards improving our transmission system by partnering in the development of the Muskrat Falls phase of the Lower Churchill project. And that project will strengthen our transmission system across Nova Scotia create capacity for transmission into the United States. And Madam Speaker, we're working collaboratively with our neighbours to enhance the regional system and create the connections necessary to develop and transmit renewable energy over the entire region, increasing the customer base and adding multiple sources of power to balance the intermittent nature of renewables. So in the short to medium term, we are working at expanding our network at the local level, supporting the construction of community-based power projects that can tie in at the distribution level. We've established the first community-fit tariff program in the world, and the ComFit. It's a unique program for locally based electricity projects, and will provide local economic development in the rural parts of our province. I know my time is just about up, Madam Chair, and I just want to close that we do have a very balanced approach to energy production in this province. We think we have what is working, and it's a balance between renewables and non-renewables, conservation and energy efficiency, and we'll continue to provide that leadership as we move forward to provide stable pricing for Nova Scotians, residential and business. So it's a carefully planned process, and I think in the end, we have a plan and we're going to stick to it. And I just want to thank Madam Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for bringing the bill forward and for this the few minutes to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today on behalf of the Progressive Conservative Caucus to speak to Bill number 10. I would like to start by congratulating the member for Dartmouth East for bringing this bill forward, for introducing it into the legislature. I know he has done a lot of work on this bill and in the area of electricity generation, renewable and otherwise more generally. And I do want to thank him and congratulate him for providing at least some practical suggestions on what can be done to get Nova Scotians off of the current treadmill of ever higher electricity rates, to aim us in the direction of a day where we can generate more of our own supply from a larger number of sources and transmit it for use around our province. After all, Madam Speaker, what we need at this time in Nova Scotia are some practical suggestions about how to get off of that treadmill and on towards that better day. Lord knows we're not getting it from the NDP, who are stuck on the current mode. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. And as we see power rates going higher and higher, as we see competition squelched, as we see regulations that are brought forward where we hear all of the benefits but are brought forward without any regard to the cost, I think Nova Scotians are crying out for at least some practical suggestions. And I say this without regard to any ideology. In fact, I think Nova Scotians want practical, non-ideological solutions to the path that we are now on. Ideas that support competition when it's practical, and that lead to more sustainable and lower priced and greener sources of power along the way. So I do want to thank the member for bringing forward some ideas in this area, which is a very important area to Nova Scotia households and to Nova Scotia business. Now, I did say that we don't want to be ideological about this, and that would generally drive us all towards increased competition for supply of energy. But we want to be practical, Madam Speaker, and I just want to draw to the attention of the House that opening up competition in the way that this bill proposes has not, in fact, in other jurisdictions, resulted in lower priced power. I don't say that to be critical of the bill necessarily, only that we need to ensure that the bill aims to do what we all hope that it will do, which is to provide us with that sustainable and lower priced power. Municipalities in Nova Scotia, for example, Madam Speaker, municipal generators of electricity do have this very right now to sell renewable, municipally generated energy directly to consumers. The fact of the matter is, no one is doing this, or very few people are doing this, because at the end of the day, the price of that power is higher, even higher than the price that Nova Scotians are paying from other sources today. In all other jurisdictions around North America that have opened up partial competition to allow for independent generation of renewable energy, as laudable as a goal as that is, the result has been more competition, but has been higher prices, both because small independent players are not able to generate the economies of scale that result in lower pricing, and because they go off the grid, that those that remain on the grid are faced with higher tolling charges as well. And again, I raise this only as food for thought as we look for that better day when we can have sustainable green power at a lower price. So I think it's fair to say that our view is that Bill 100 is a practical suggestion. It does need some work. It certainly encourages private production of renewable energy. That is a good thing. The NDP like to set goals for these things without any regard to who's going to pay for it. At the end of the day, if we have a bill that encourages private investors, big or small, to invest their own private capital to produce renewable energy, then surely that is a good thing. And if we can get to that day where they can do that at a price that is competitive with Nova Scotia Power in our case, all the better. That is the positive of the bill, that it will allow some of those things to happen. Unfortunately, today, I don't think we should hold up a false hope that the bill will result in lower rates. That has not been the experience of every other jurisdiction in North America that has tried this route. It is not yet the experience here in Nova Scotia with municipal renewable power generators. So we need some work. But so too does the alternative that is being worked on today. Madam Speaker, feed-in tariffs into the electricity grid, into the Nova Scotia Power transmission system also need work because they are not doing what we hoped they would do, which is the same thing, to encourage small, independent, renewable, green power producers, whether they're hydro or wind or tidal or what have you, to invest their own resources in order to sell at a profitable rate as a feed-in into the existing grid. So that too needs some more work because Nova Scotians want practical, real solutions. And that is not to say that we should do nothing, Madam Speaker. In fact, we need to step on the gas pedal to get this right. We need to work both on Bill 10, which is before us today, to ensure that it does what we all hope it will do. We need to work on the feed-in tariff regime in the hopes that we can get that structure to a place where it does what we all hope it can do. But there are other things that we can do in the immediate time frame, Madam Speaker, including intervening in the URB, something that both opposition parties have called on the government repeatedly over the last 2 days to do, something that it is its duty, I believe, as an elected representative government of the people to speak up on their behalf when higher rate applications come before the Utilities and Review Board, something that 2 days in, we're still waiting for the government to say that whether they will or not. Something that we're stepping up to do anyway, because if they won't, then we will, because that's what we're elected to do, to make sure that the people's voice is heard. When power rates, something that is so important to our households and to our small businesses, are going up and up and up. That is something that every party in this House can do today, that the government still has not said they will do, which is shocking because normally governments do intervene. In addition, Madam Speaker, we can ensure that we have smart regulation of our power producers and of the transmission system. That when we propose new targets, that when we come up with new ideas, as beneficial as they may be about streetlights or other targets, that we make sure that we explain to Nova Scotians not just the benefits, as great as they may be, but that we're also upfront with Nova Scotians about the cost in increased power rates, because today they're only getting half the story. Minister of Energy says they want a balanced approach. I don't see how it's a balanced approach when you tell them only half the story. The fact of the matter is that power rates are going up for a variety of reasons. The government likes to point the finger at world markets for coal and other things. That is, again, only half the story. That there are decisions that have been made by this government that have had a direct impact on rising power rates. And when we ask for that information, the government denies it. And that is not a balanced approach when only half the story is given. And finally, Madam Speaker, it's important that we attack this problem of rising energy costs on a regional basis. I think we can all imagine the day when Newfoundland Hydro, when New Brunswick Nuclear, and when Nova Scotia Tidal and wind power are all put together in the same basket of diversified energy generation sources, so that we get to that day where we can turn energy pricing from a disadvantage for our province and for our whole region into a competitive advantage, that households and businesses can benefit from long-term, fixed-price, stable, competitively priced green electricity from all of those sources. That is that better day that we want to get to. But between now and then, Nova Scotians deserve more than lofty words from the government. They deserve practical suggestions. They deserve practical intervention. They deserve practical regulation and practical steps that will get them from here to there. Bill 10, although not perfect, is at least an honourable suggestion to get us there. And I will conclude again by commending the member for Dartmouth East for doing his homework and bringing it forward. And I only wish that the NDP would do the same. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And pleased to rise to my place and speak in support of Bill number 10, the Electricity Act. And, anytime I get up to speak about electricity, I guess I'm brought back to memory lane a little bit. When in 1973-74 was my first year teaching. I was teaching. I hear some catcalls from my colleagues in the back that long ago. It's got to be the former Minister of Education. But anyway, I'm brought back to the reality of 1973, and of course the first oil embargo in the Mideast, and the impact on, of course, oil prices in Nova Scotia, and the immediate rise in electrical rates in our province, a rush to look at, how we could improve the efficiency of insulation in our homes, because the price of heating them went up very quickly, very dramatically. Then we had a second round in the 80s, and
Order,
now...
please. The chatter's getting a little loud. It's difficult to hear as the honourable member of Kings West has the floor. Thank you.
It's like, we're going to have, in a continuous fashion, high oil prices, high costs of our electrical inputs. And so because of that, we need to look at all of the ideas, potential legislation that comes before our legislature here, no matter from what party it is brought forth. It needs a thoughtful deliberation as to how we can have a greater amount of renewable energy and to work towards some stabilization of our rates. So this bill, of course, is essentially about energy providers selling directly to consumers. And I do have a lot of faith in entrepreneurial Nova Scotians who can bring good ideas to fruition to produce energy. Many small producers see, in fact, on their own land holdings, small streams that could produce a small amount of hydro. Others are experimenting with solar. And I think if we could allow them to sell directly to customers, I would see, as our past has shown us, that there indeed is a great innovative and entrepreneurial spirit that can be awakened on the energy front. And I think it's that singular thought behind this piece of legislation that gives it tremendous merits. And, the reality in Nova Scotia is that a monopoly is determining much of how we move forward with providing electricity for the 21st century in Nova Scotia. We need to move quickly to the goals that have been set out, 40% by 2020. There's tremendous work to be done to reach that target, and I'm not so sure whether price stabilization will in fact be part of the mix that's coming at us. I think increased competition will mean Nova Scotia power rates would become more competitive. As I said, anytime we have a monopoly, we have that challenge of trying to get them to rein in their cost, make long-term contracts for coal and oil that are beneficial to Nova Scotians. And we know that the history of procurement has not been a strong one. And so there are a lot of areas that when we ask for and talk about the need to have a review of Nova Scotia Power to see if Nova Scotians are constantly being served in their best interest. So I think competition would increase the availability of renewable energy in a way that puts a lesser burden on Nova Scotia ratepayers. And the Nova Scotians, in fact, I had some emails this week that really put it profoundly to me. Two retired couples who said they are at the point of having contemplating and talking about the most difficult decision that they will make in the next number of months, whether they can continue to live in Nova Scotia with the current costs that they have. And as they look at the history of 7 increases in power in a decade and likely increases for the next 4 successive years, it is something that on fixed income they have to seriously look at if they want to maintain what, and in knowing these two couples, what is indeed a modest way of life. And so now Nova Scotia is seeking another large increase, again on the backs of consumers, and we have seen power rate increases dig deeper into the pockets of Nova Scotians. Families and businesses can no longer sustain this old-fashioned reliance on coal and oil. It is interesting, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, the need to move to renewables, while again may not stabilize, is also in a good business interest for us. It is when we see some of the large retailers taking a look at how products are made, what are the inputs? Is it green energy or is it dirty energy? We are now getting major retailers taking a look at how a product is being made. What is the energy consumption pattern that goes into producing that product? Now, the recommendation on this particular concept of providers selling directly to customers came forward in 2003 following the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee recommendation. It was made up of government officials, officials from the utility, industry and energy and environment stakeholders. 8 years later and numerous ministers later, nothing has been done. And I think one of my colleagues did mention a quote from the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee, that any seller offering electricity from renewable resources be able to sell directly to electricity customers. I think this is a concept whose time has come in Nova Scotia, and I think with, as I said earlier, the many ways in which Nova Scotians are thinking about energy and electricity for their own use, and being able to provide perhaps a small community, a small rural area, a farm or a couple of farms. I think those kinds of enterprises need to be supported. And also, it's interesting that the minister said that the current grid system and market application would not be able to sustain this, would not be able to bring this forward. But at the same time, we know that COMFIT and the goal of 40% renewable, in fact, requires, requires a similar system. So it's interesting that on the one hand, the minister doesn't see this renewable energy concept of providers going directly to consumers as being somewhat markedly different than COMFIT. And so it's interesting that the minister did bring that forward, because from the best information we can get, in fact, there are very similar grid and market requirements. So this legislation would open a door to renewable energy projects in the province, which would generate jobs and much needed tax revenue, and would also, I think, start to clearly show Nova Scotians that there should be more than one power producer in our province. And if we take a look at many jurisdictions, they've been able to hold the line on power rates, and ones that don't have, for example, Quebec's and BC's dominance of hydroelectricity, but have a number of production methods in their mix, and they've been able to hold the line by good, solid competition. Allowing competition in the renewable energy market also provides much needed access to capital for renewable energy suppliers, while ensuring Nova Scotians get the most cost-effective and energy-effective renewable energy. Making the energy market more competitive would increase the number of options available to Nova Scotians, create jobs, and work as a privately funded economic development tool in many communities. The NDP talks of new electricity and renewable energy plans. The history so far in government shows only minimal effort to protect the environment and help Nova Scotians with rate stabilization. We also need to push renewable targets out into the future, and they've sidelined national commitments such as those on mercury reduction. And with that, Madam Speaker, perhaps we'll address this topic on another day. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the official opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 523?
Thank you. I call resolution 523, the MOU agreement breach. I now recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to stand in my place and speak to resolution 523, and of course the impact that this will have on all taxpayers in the province, either directly or indirectly. And I want to speak to some of the work, Madam Minister, that goes into MOUs. And in particular, of course, this one with the municipalities across the province. But if you look, Madam Speaker, at the at the whereas in the resolution, I think there are some highlights that we need to pull out of those whereases. And the first one, of course, is that during the election campaign of 2009, there was a commitment by the NDP and by the current Premier to honour all commitments that had been made by the previous government. And, you know, that was an honourable thing to do, and I believe that that is something that Nova Scotians expected would happen. And I would expect that the reason that commitment was made was because when you look at MOUs in particular, they do require a fair bit of negotiation. They do require a number of meetings at the negotiating table, and a lot of hard work on the part of the two parties. If it's an agreement between two parties, the work on behalf of those two parties that goes into those negotiations needs to be respected. And after a lot of those meetings, the two parties come together with an agreement, with a memorandum of understanding in this particular case. And so it certainly was respectful of the current Premier to say that they would honour those commitments that have been made. One of the MOUs that obviously is of particular importance to me was the MOU with, in education with post-secondary universities. But again, it's the work that goes into coming together with an agreement, and people walk away from that table expecting that both sides, not just the government side, but both sides, respect the terms and conditions of that. And so when the Premier, or the current Premier, made that commitment, people in the municipalities were expecting that the work and effort that they had put into establishing an MOU would be respected, and they were ready for all parties to honour that. However, unfortunately, that didn't happen. And that's why we are speaking to this resolution today. What happened, and we know, is the second whereas in the resolution, which says that on March 22nd, 2011, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations informed municipalities that they would not be honouring the commitments made in that MOU. And so that really destroys all of the hard work that had gone into that, all of the goodwill that had gone into that, and all of the expectations. Again, I'm speaking about both sides. It would be the same as if the municipalities decided that they weren't going to honour their part of that. So it is an agreement. And so the message on March 22nd was unfortunate, and it was one that I guess demonstrates perhaps a lack of faith and a lack of keeping to a prior commitment that had been made. We know that the municipalities together expressed their concern about that, and their concern, I believe, is expressed on behalf of the taxpayers in their own municipalities. But they came together with a common voice and a common concern. And they obviously were expecting that they would operate within the parameters of that MOU, and were suddenly told that no, that was not going to happen. And so the unknown, the uncertainty of what will happen as a result of the MOU not being honoured is something that has caused them concern. And one of their concerns, we know, is what that will do to their ability to hold the taxes within their own communities, within their own municipalities, so that the property owners are not paying for the failure of the government to not respect and honour the MOU. So we know we have a little cascading, I guess, of responsibility from the government to the municipalities, and municipalities get their money from one source, and that's you and I. So, Madam Speaker, the concern is that the municipalities are expressing is on behalf of the property owners in their own municipalities. And if you look at a parallel, I would say, to the MOU with the municipalities was the MOU with the universities. And we have had over the last probably 8 years MOUs with universities, 3-year agreements. And again, a lot of people sat around the table for many, many hours, and eventually they hammered out an agreement that the government would respect and that the universities would respect. And during the life of the MOU, whether it's with education or whether it's with the municipalities, during the life of that MOU, the parties, in this case the universities, could pass on to their constituents, which happen to be university students, information that would allow them to do some budget planning themselves. So things were predictable. The funding was sustainable for 3 years. It was predictable, and so university students could take that information and they could plan their own budgets for how they were going to pay for their university. So the point here, Madam Speaker, is that once you take that away, the uncertainty rears its head. And with the universities, of course, there now is no MOU. Again, this is something that was put in place so that all parties could work together, come to an agreement, and move forward. In the case with the municipalities, it is the taxpayers who are wondering what impact this will have on them. In the case of the universities, it's the students. And we all know that the students are now feeling and seeing and hearing what some of that impact will be, because universities are coming out now and saying, well, we're going to have to put our tuition up. Well, that lands fairly on the backs of the students. If municipalities have to put up their, increase their tax rate, that will land fairly on the backs of the taxpayers. And so the point here, Madam Speaker, is that when you take away that predictability, that kind of a guarantee of what all the players are going to contribute to this, when you take that away, you leave a lot of uncertainty. And you know, those two MOUs that have, one is not being respected, the other is not even negotiating. And they have said that, the government has said, well, we'll give funding for a year and to universities. And again, that gets you through the 1 year, but during that time, you have many people who are not sure what to do. A lot of students are leaving and they're going somewhere else. And once they start that university education in another province, chances of them coming back here, if there's another MOU signed, and I say if, you know, it's highly unlikely. So respecting and honoring the hard work that's done by the teams that sit down to hammer out an MOU is something that we would have hoped and expected the current government to honor. And the uncertainty that is created when that doesn't happen is exactly what we're feeling right now. And whether it is, as I said, the taxpayers who are wondering what their own municipality is going to do, because the municipality is uncertain now about what responsibilities they're going to have and what funding is or is not going to be flowing back and forth between the two levels of government. That uncertainty has been expressed, and on behalf of the taxpayers, the mayors and wardens and the councillors have made it very clear that they don't want to raise taxes, the same as the universities don't want to raise tuition. But if there's no agreement that holds people to certain understandings and certain terms, then it's kind of free market. And free market contributes to no ability to plan or predict. And so, Madam Speaker, I will take your signal. I will take my place, but I do appreciate the time to express concerns that we have about the MOU with the municipalities not being respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I have to say I'm really glad for an opportunity to speak to this resolution. I should apologize to my staff if they're listening. They prepared a speech for me, but I'm not going to use it. I want to say that it probably is quite appropriate that the Liberal member who just spoke was the one who spoke for the Liberal caucus, because she was a cabinet minister in the Conservative caucus when they signed the MOU. So I think that's really interesting. And I'm going to table a copy of the MOU, Madam Speaker. And the point I want members to notice if they get a copy of this is it's signed by the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations in the Conservative government, and on the same page. Progressive Conservative. And on the same page that the signatures are there from the President of the UNSM and the Minister, it also has the clause that allows the province to come out of this agreement. It's actually on the very page they put their signatures. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm going to read from this. It's an editorial from the Chronicle Herald dated the 23rd of April, and I'll table this when I do that. Anyway, last week, Halifax Mayor Peter Kelly was front and center in a march of mayors to protest the Dexter government's suspension of a non-binding deal to phase out the share of education, corrections and public housing costs borne by municipal taxpayers. The mayor said the province's failure to take over these costs would force them to raise taxes. They don't think provincial deficit reduction was a good reason for local taxes to go up. Their unhappiness about losing an expected windfall is understandable. But it would have been prudent not to put unquestioning faith in a commitment the previous government made in 2007 without a plan to pay for it. With most of the benefits deferred for 3 years or more, and with an opt-out clause saying, quote, the municipalities acknowledge that unforeseen costs or revenue losses may impair the province's ability to achieve its commitments, which is precisely what has happened. As Abraham Lincoln once reminded one of his generals, the wise hen doesn't cluck until the egg is laid. Meanwhile, the Halifax draft 2011-12 budget that went to council this week will mean higher property tax bills, but not because the province reneged on a wobbly promise. The city's tax rate for the mandatory provincial charges actually declined from 35.4 cents to 34 cents per $100 of residential assessment because the province won't end the phase-out of these charges until next year. So I'll table that, Madam Speaker. And what I want to say to the members opposite, and in particular the Liberal caucus who brought forward this resolution, they started out by saying how the Dexter government had reneged on its commitments. It's that the Premier had said he would honour commitments of the previous government. Well, I think the Premier has done that. I think this government has done that. It was commitments by the government, not commitments by MLAs as they paraded around the province, you know, committing this, saying we're committed to this or that. The members opposite, any of them who were former cabinet ministers, would know a commitment by the government is a commitment that has passed scrutiny at Executive Council. So the member for Colchester North, as she spoke, she talked about planning and how the action of moving away from the MOU had now allowed municipalities to be in a place where they couldn't plan. Well, it would seem to me that if you sign an agreement with an out clause for the government, that puts you in a place where you can't really plan very well because you can't be sure the government isn't going to be able to back out of that agreement because of the financial situation of the province, Madam Speaker, which is why the previous administration put that clause in. And the members who signed it recognized that. So to say that we didn't honor the MOU, I think we honored the MOU. Matter of fact, we honored all of it. It's the members opposite who say, oh, you were supposed to honor most of the MOU, just don't honor that clause. So, right, but not all of them. So I think the editorial in the paper said it pretty well, and I want the members to think seriously about the position that the municipalities were in prior to the MOU. Prior to the MOU, the municipal units had to cover about $17.4 million of corrections, about $7 to $7.5 million in housing, and then about 14 to 15% of the Department of Education budget based on assessment, and then a rate applied to that assessment in order to come up with that amount. So what has happened, Madam Speaker, is that starting in 10-11 was the first start of the phase out for corrections. It was about a $3.5 million reduction and another $3.5 million reduction in corrections this year. Plus half of the housing reduction started. So there was about a $3.5 million reduction in the housing costs. And you know, the members opposite talking about doom and gloom and municipalities raising taxes, it didn't happen. Matter of fact, they got a reduction in their costs to the MOU last year and this year, and there was no reduction in taxes to their taxpayers. So what do they complain about? So why do they think that there'll be an increase in taxes as they bear these costs forward? They've been carrying these costs, and they didn't offer a reduction to their taxpayers when the municipalities got a reduction. I haven't seen the members stand up and recognize that. And to say they're broke. Yeah. So, Madam Speaker, the point I'm going to make is that the municipalities are not going to be as well off as they would have been had they come out through the MOU the way it was signed, but they are getting a reduction of $3.5 million in corrections going forward. They only have to contribute $14 million starting in 12-13, and that is a $3.5 million reduction from what they were paying when they entered the MOU. And we're going to hold the education rate at the 10-11 rate going forward in 12-13. And one of the comments that's been made here, Madam Speaker, is that they were blindsided. I met the president of the UNSM just a week or two after I became minister, and I didn't even get to say there's going to be changes. He said to me, we know there's going to be changes. What we'd like to have is a guarantee that we'll get the 1-year notice. And 1-year notice isn't in the MOU. It's in the Municipal Government Act. So there really was no reason that we had to comply with a 1-year notice, but it was going to have an impact on them, and that's what why that clause was in the MGA. So, Madam Speaker, I said I would try as much as possible to give the 1-year notice, and that's what we delivered. We weren't asked for anything else or anything more. We were asked to give, if we could give 1-year notice. I said I would try to do that. I didn't even make a commitment that I'd do it. I just said I made a commitment that I would try, and we were able to deliver on that. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say to members opposite that the impacts on municipalities for this, they've been charging this in their tax rate for years. There's no reason for taxes to go up for their residents. Matter of fact, if anything, they're not going to have a tax increase. And, Madam Speaker, if anything, they're getting a reduction. So there should be a reduction in their taxes coming out of the end of the changes to the MOU. And so, Madam Speaker, the assertions made by certainly the Liberal Party, and I have heard on occasion from the Conservative Party, don't hold water. The municipal units will come out of the changes to the MOU better than when they went into the MOU, and that should be better for all of their taxpayers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I find it interesting that the minister quoted Abraham Lincoln this afternoon. And because I know that, that the great Abraham, he provided a quote of Abraham Lincoln, but it reminded me of Abraham Lincoln and the fact that he recognized that after the Civil War, he realized that they had a divided country and they needed to rebuild that country. And he knew that those who fought for the North and the South were all Americans who needed to come together to build their country. And much the same way, we Nova Scotians are all together when we pay our taxes, whether we pay them at the municipal level or the provincial level. And the question we would ask, if an agreement is changed, if I may be so kind enough to use the term changed, that has the potential to change the taxes that Nova Scotians pay, and we're all in this game together. So, Madam Speaker, I think that the municipalities have spoke loud and clear. They had, I believe it was 63 mayors, wardens, and councillors were here just 2 weeks ago, and they felt that, you know, the agreement being changed was going to have an impact on them, and they speak for a lot of Nova Scotians. One other point I'd like to make, Madam Speaker, is that in 2009, the Minister at the time for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations spoke about a town's task force to deal with long-term sustainability for towns. And we're in April of 2011 now, and we, as far as I'm aware of, we don't have that task force in place. And we do know that it was something requested by the municipalities. And hopefully that will begin to take shape. But Madam Speaker, another point that I want to touch on is deficits. And we know this province is dealing with a deficit. They had a surprise surplus last year. And but they say they're dealing with a deficit. And I did some numbers on this. I looked at what is the actual amount of dollars that is not going to be going to Inverness over the next couple of years. And it worked out, I believe, in 2013-14, it looked like it was going to be about 3% of their $12 million budget. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because that's not far off from where this government was with its deficit. And so I guess, Madam Speaker, in fairness, if we're trying to be consistent with how we look at things, whether we're a Nova Scotian looking at paying municipal tax or provincial tax or federal tax for that matter, we're all in this together. And we would question the changing an agreement like this, which is going to change, which is going to impact, municipalities say that it's going to impact their budgets, and we know that municipalities can't run deficits. So they have two choices. If things have changed, as they've said that they have, that means they either have to cut back or they have to raise taxes. Could be property tax increases, for example. So I guess, Madam Speaker, we find it strange that a government who is dealing with a deficit would put this onto municipalities, some of whom are dealing with deficits. I tabled a document in here about 2 weeks ago, and from recollection, I believe it was 12 municipalities and 5 towns, I think, that were running deficit budgets that they have to correct within a year because under the Municipal Government Act, they're not allowed to run deficits. This is a protective measure to ensure that municipalities don't overspend. Maybe we should have had this in place provincially years ago, Madam Speaker. We've actually advocated for legislation here in this very sitting to get back to balanced budgets because we see over time what deficits, what damage they can create. For instance, 1 out of every approximately $8 that Nova Scotians hand over to us, to this chamber, gets thrown out the window in interest payments. And that's something we feel is urgent, and we should be doing something about that by balancing the budget. But I'm going to move back to the discussion at hand today. And just to point out that once again, the irony of this government putting a pressure on municipal budgets, which could put them in deficit, when they claim they're trying to deal with a deficit. And if we look I think we also have to look at what's going to happen in 2014, because significant revenues, about 36% of every dollar that comes into the provincial treasury here comes from the federal government. And Madam Speaker, if the federal government, who they've said that they're going to balance their books in the coming years after providing stimulus, which we've benefited in this province in significant ways. We've had the 3 largest road building budgets in the history of the province the last 3 years. And that's credit to the previous Progressive Conservative government, and also to our good Minister Estabrooks. And so, look, I've given credit to both sides. But, Madam Speaker, and that's a pure fact, the federal government has been good to the province, and they've seen the damage that was done to the economy with the crash of the stock market in 2008. And but the federal government is changing its path now. They've provided the stimulus. It's time now to back off. And so we can't expect as much, at least infrastructure spending. We know we're not going to get as much in that regard. But as the federal government aims to balance its budget, it may add pressures to this province. Federal transfers may decrease. That's something that we should be looking at now, Madam Speaker. Something we should be preparing for now. And just going to check, Madam Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
You have 4 minutes remaining.
4 minutes, okay. So I think this is, if we're going to be consistent, and I'm going to be watching this government, should something change in 2014, provided they're still here, maybe there'll be an election before that, Madam Speaker. But I'm going to be watching government to see what they would say, and I don't know what the federal government would do, but if there is a change to transfers and it affects this province, I'm curious to see if they'll point the federal government and put blame on them and say, well, why are you doing this to us? Well, we're going to remember, and all the municipalities of this province are going to remember, well, you did it to us. So that's something I'm going to be watching for. And I think it's important in government that we're consistent. The Premier had some comments on this, and if I may quote, there was a comment, if there's any increase in municipal taxes, it is 100% due to the decisions that will be made by municipalities. It will not be due to anything that this government has done. And, Mr. Speaker, the municipalities have taken exception to that comment. And, you know, we have to too, because it's simple. We know that there was, under the agreement, there was a plan for funds to flow to the municipalities, and that's changed. So all things being equal, that means that, that if there's an increase in municipal taxes, it very well could be due to the change in the MOU. And Madam Speaker, I guess the other point I'd like to touch on, because I know we don't have a lot of time this evening, but one final point, then I'm going to summarize. Yes, this government gave the municipalities a 1-year notice, but it was required by law to do that. And I think we have a disagreement there, Madam Speaker. But we know that there was that the province has to provide the municipalities a 1-year advance notice so they can prepare their budgets. But I mean, it was done basically within. They were given a call. I'm going to summarize. So, Madam Speaker, I guess the question I would ask: what does this mean for this government? And I think what we've seen is, or what we're going to see from this, is that the government has lost credibility with municipalities. They've lost the trust of municipalities. And they've lost credibility. If the federal government makes a similar decision with respect to this province in 2014 onward, this government has lost a crucial point of credibility to make the same case with the federal government that they should continue to provide this province with the same amount of funds they have historically. And finally, Madam Speaker, there is one taxpayer in this province, and that one taxpayer, we feel, with these changes, stands a very good chance to end up paying more taxes, likely in this case from municipalities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I listened in great interest to the minister talking about no tax increases. Well, miracles happen, but that's not one that's going to happen. We talked about no increases this year, and the mayor of Halifax Regional Municipality correctly said there'd be no increases this year. But if you look at the internal report, which I tabled here, and the minister should have read by now, indicated there's going to be an increase every year incrementally up to about $19 million per year in the 4th year of this agreement. I think it's very cleverly drafted, this cancellation of this MOU. What's happening is that the present government will be gone by the time that this impacts, because people are really upset about all the tax changes and increases the NDP's put in place, the 1,400 fees they put in place, the GST increase, and all the other things, and now downloading on the municipalities, even worse, with the cancellation of this MOU. So by the time they're gone, when the next election comes around, they're hoping people will forget. Well, I guarantee you, as long as I sit in this legislature, every year I'm in this legislature, every session, I am going to remind Nova Scotians about this MOU. And as they start paying the higher property taxes, they're going to click in and they're going to say, well, that was something the NDP canceled and pushed up our taxes, our property taxes. And as we go through this whole process, and I've been talking to many of the mayors of the areas now, and evidently when I talk to them, the minister hasn't been. He hasn't been. They're indicating to me this is going to cause some very serious financial problems for them. And anybody over there that thinks it isn't, you want to talk to your council, you want to talk to your mayors in your towns, in your counties, and see exactly what kind of impact this is going to be. This is a serious impact. And needless to say, I'm going to remind the government of this on a continuous basis. And this ranks right up there with the 2% GST increase that everybody is paying. And every time that the Premier gets up and says all the things he's taken the GST off of, but he forgets the thousands of things that they increased to 2% on. And indeed, that hurts everybody. You talk about increased property taxes. I'm continually seeing people in my riding coming in and saying, I can't cope with my property taxes. I can't pay them. And these are usually seniors, people on fixed income, or people that are just living above the poverty or below the poverty level, and 2 members of the family working. The people that this government always championed. You're hurting the people, the actual people that the NDP has always said they champion. So there's a real dilemma there. So you wonder, now that they've got in government, all the promises they made that they wouldn't change anything, they'd follow through on the things the previous government has put in place, and indeed they're not doing that. And you see this as it goes forward, it's going to become more and more difficult for Nova Scotians. And when you talk about the average Nova Scotian that has a couple of children and see how they try to survive in this economy, and you look at the property taxes going up, the fees going up, and the GST going up, and all the other hidden costs that are going to be in place, it's going to have a serious effect long-term on people in the community. You see businesses struggling in the province. You see businesses closing. You see them closing. And this tax increase is not going to hurt the property tax increase. It won't hurt the business community this year. It'll hurt it next year, the year after, and the year after, and the year after that. One more blow to make them less competitive with companies in just as far close as New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. That's only close. And today, if you don't market outside of Nova Scotia and outside of Canada, indeed, you can't survive anymore. And if they get uncompetitive when they go outside of Nova Scotia, when they export outside of the country, they won't be in business. It's that simple. They will move out of Nova Scotia, or they will close their doors. And we're seeing people that are closing their doors. And as people close their doors, that means less employment opportunities. That means that people either have to find another job that probably doesn't exist in Nova Scotia, and they move out west. If we're lucky, they stay in Canada. They move out west, and once they're there for 3 or 4 years, they don't come back. They simply don't come back. So we lose all that expertise, and the people that worked hard and tried to make this province as great as it is today. You know, this whole thing is really smacks of a deal not being kept. It's that simple. And it's really nice and smooth because the municipalities won't see too much of the impact of this year. They'll start to see it next year, and 3 or 4 years out, they're going to really see the impact. Well, I talked to one mayor today, and he's going to see the impact this year, and it's a serious impact. And I'm waiting to get the information from him, which he promised to send me. And as more and more of this information that people are sending me, it's going to become interesting to see when it's all tabulated exactly what it's going to cost Nova Scotia taxpayers. And the minister continually says there's one taxpayer in this province. No, there isn't. There's two taxpayers in this province. People that pay GST and income tax, that's everybody in the province. Property tax owners are a lot fewer in number, and they're being hit with higher and higher and higher taxes for the service they get. So there's actually two levels of taxpayers in this province, one of them being taxpayers with property, and the other, all the rest of the other taxpayers that don't have property. So when you charge things like corrections and housing and education onto the property tax owners, that indeed that really aren't responsibilities of the municipalities, you're getting them to pay twice. They pay in their income tax, they pay in their GST, and then they pay in their property taxes. And I guarantee you, there's nobody I can talk to, that I've talked to in this municipality, that's happy with the amount of property taxes they're paying today. And it's going to get worse. It's absolutely going to get worse. And as you see, the province would have, if they would have taken over the cost of the municipal auditor that was in that same agreement in the MOU, or the assessment services one, that would have helped the municipalities cope with this increasing burden they're getting. And as the burden grows and grows, and as people start to realize that their taxes are creeping up every year, assessments are going up, so their rates go up, it's nice to see the municipalities actually committing to put that bill, that cost that they have to pay to the province on the tax bill, so people will understand what they're paying the money for and where the money is going. If you have sidewalks on your street and it's on your property tax bill, that's fair. That's fair enough. But if you're paying for corrections and housing and education, that's a province of Nova Scotia responsibility that there was agreement to eliminate. Then you're paying for a service that you're paying more than your fair share for. You should be paying for that in your income tax and GST and all the other taxes and services that the province provides for and indeed charges taxes for. So if as a property tax owner, and as there are many in the province, you watch this thing and see what's going on. And when they finally realize what this downloading has done and done to their property taxes and see how their taxes have gone up. And when they come to you in government, the MLAs, and say, I cannot pay my property taxes, what can I do? What can I do? And I'm seeing them all the time. All the time I'm seeing people. What are you going to tell them? Where are you going to get the money? We don't have money to pay their property taxes. So their house goes up for sale and something they've worked on for their whole lives to have is gone. And it happens. It does happen. If anyone hasn't gone through a tax sale, a property tax sale, with one of your constituents, look out because it's coming. And it will come. And you see really good people that worked hard all their lives to get a home, losing the home for property taxes. And that's something that has to change. It has to change. So more arrangements and deals can be made with people to keep their homes and keep them in their home. We talk about affordable housing for people and keep a housing in place. The most affordable housing we can have in this is somebody's own home. And most of the people have them paid off. They have them paid off. They get in this dilemma. And they're living at the lowest possible cost. So if you take that away, and those people have to move out of their lifelong property, in some cases more than one generation, and get to a point where they lose this property, what's the cost of government then? It costs them a whole lot more because you're going to go into public housing, or you've got to rent an apartment that they can't afford. So what do? And if you live in the country someplace, it's not so easy just to get another property. You can't move in an apartment because usually there is none. Or you got to move into some house that's probably not fit to live in, but the only place you can get, and hopefully the landlord will maintain it a little bit so it's safe to live in. But you see this whole thing happening over and over again. People have got to understand this will increase their property taxes, not this year, but next year and the following year. And I've tabled the information here, but from HRM, and you want to have a look at it. An internal audit, an internal report by the staff there. And there's more information coming in all the time from other municipalities showing how it's going to negatively impact them. You can laugh, you can joke about it, you can say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, when your constituents and my constituents are paying
Order,
more
please.
property
The member
tax,
from Preston has the floor.
when you're paying more property taxes, they're going to remember that the NDP government downloaded it on them. And we're going to remind them of that on a continuous basis. So as you go knocking on door to door during the next election campaign, and you should be reminded, you'll be reminded by those people that you're the guys that put my property taxes up, and I'm not going to forget it on election day. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you. I now recognize the Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This completes the Liberal Opposition business for today. I'd now turn it over to the Deputy Government House Leader for tomorrow's business.
I recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I move that the House do now rise to meet again tomorrow at the hour of 12 o'clock, with the House hours being from 12 noon to 8 o'clock, and the orders of the day being daily routine. And after question period, we will, if time permits, call for public bills and orders, public bills for second reading, and bills number 17, 21, 23, 25, 27, 30, 33, 35, 38, and 40. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Order, please. I'd recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader to complete his...
the daily routine, of course, having the estimates as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The motion is that we now rise to meet again tomorrow, April 28th, from between the hours of 12 noon and 8 p.m. All in favour? Are those opposed? The motion is carried. It's now the moment of interruption. I now call under Rule 5.5, as read earlier today, resolution put forward by the Honourable Member from Lunenburg, that reads, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the work being done in the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage to advance arts, culture, multiculturalism and community development in Nova Scotia. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in my place today to speak on this very important topic. As Ministerial Assistant to the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, I'm very excited about the potential for this new department to bring a broader focus to protecting and celebrating Nova Scotia's diverse culture and heritage. Madam Speaker, communities are important to all of us. They touch our lives in so many ways and help us to achieve our hopes and aspirations. Madam Speaker, communities help define who we are and how we interact with the world around us. They provide outlets for creativity and opportunities for learning that prepare us to be active, engaged citizens. And Madam Speaker, government understands that supporting healthy and vibrant communities is a priority for Nova Scotians. That is why we chose to create a Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage earlier this year, when it realigned a number of departments. And Madam Speaker, as an artist and craftsman and member of the community of culture, I would like to say that I'm very pleased that a lot of my friends called me and expressed their great enthusiasm over the creation of this department. Madam Speaker, this reflects how this government is doing things differently. We're listening to what's important to Nova Scotians and doing the work that make our communities strong. Madam Speaker, after just a few months, the department has already begun to create positive impact on communities right across the province. It hit the ground speaking, Madam Speaker, from announcing a 5-point plan for arts and culture to supporting public libraries in every part of Nova Scotia, to funding museums that tell our stories, and programming that helps protect and promote our distinct cultural communities. The department is helping make life better for Nova Scotia families. And Madam Speaker, just a few weeks after the Premier announced the creation of this new department, government released a plan for strengthening our important arts and culture sector. Almost 1,000 Nova Scotians came out last fall to offer their ideas and insights on how we can support the creative excellence of our province. Madam Speaker, they made it clear that arts and culture are important to Nova Scotians, and the government's effort to support the success of our creative economy make a big difference in the ability of individual artists to pursue their vision. Madam Speaker, advancing artistic achievement is a key priority for the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage. And Madam Speaker, our new 5-point plan is a blueprint for successfully growing our arts and culture sector. Madam Speaker, the plan will ensure the importance of arts in Nova Scotia, that it's recognized by the status of the artist legislation, and it will reinforce the independence of funding decisions for individual artists by creating Arts Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, Arts Nova Scotia will take over the responsibility for peer panels that make decisions on artist funding and announce those decisions once they're made. Madam Speaker, the plan will provide opportunities for dialogue with the sectors and, through a revamped department website, new ways for artists to market and promote their work to audiences through the internet. Madam Speaker, the 5-point plan also ensures that voices of the sector continue to play a role in guiding government support for arts and culture throughout the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council. The Council, which is evolving from the Nova Scotia Arts and Culture Partnership Council, will continue to advise government on arts policy and will lead the development of a cultural strategy for Nova Scotia, the first for our province. And Madam Speaker, government's efforts to support the sector will be enhanced by an interdepartmental committee to coordinate activities across government and to look at ways to leverage other sources of funding to ensure support for artists and organizations that advocate for them. Madam Speaker, the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage is also supporting communities through programs and services that enhance the protection of our precious heritage resources. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia's heritage resources make a valuable contribution to communities and support lifelong learning. Through the Nova Scotia Museum System and the efforts of local heritage groups and community museums, that heritage remains accessible to visitors and residents alike. Madam Speaker, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic recently made history by using social media to commemorate the 99th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. The museum used Twitter to broadcast the emergency message sent out by the Titanic on that fateful night almost a century ago, providing a new way for Nova Scotians to learn about a tragic part of our maritime history. And Madam Speaker, the world was paying attention. The 55 tweets that the museum generated much interest, and this innovative approach to interpreting an historic event is one way that Nova Scotia's museums are keeping our history alive and relevant. Madam Speaker, this spring, the Museum of Natural History in Halifax has broken attendance records at a T-Rex named Sue. More than 80,000 visitors have taken in this world-class exhibit, and the museum is close to surpassing its total annual visitation target for this year because of this one exhibit alone. And Madam Speaker, the Museum of Natural History will continue to enhance Nova Scotia's understanding of the natural world as it introduces new permanent exhibits for the first time in 20 years. Madam Speaker, community-run museums across Nova Scotia make vital contributions to their communities by encouraging lifelong learning and helping to attract visitors during tourist season. Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage support their work through community museum assistance programs. This year, 67 museums will benefit from $980,000 being invested in the grant program. Madam Speaker, the new department is also supporting our public libraries. Even as government makes the hard decisions needed to live within its means, it's maintaining more than